and give them a chance to say something as well. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
Jacinta Ardern.
This year is the 75th anniversary of Social Security in this country, and it's an occasion that I believe we should, under any other circumstances, be celebrating. 75 years ago, as a nation, we drew a line in the sand. We determined that, as any decent society should, that the measure of our country would not solely be marked by the achievements of individuals, but how we served and cared for one another, and especially our most vulnerable. As a nation, we also decided that this line in the sand was not a line of judgment. We then lined up on one side the deserving and on the other side the undeserving poor. Social Security was for everyone who found themselves in need. But, Mr. Speaker, it's time that we're all admit the obvious, and that is that politics has muddied the waters of Social Security. And there is no better example of that than this bill that we are debating today. Now, if you listen, Mr. Speaker, to the rhetoric of the National Party, as we have continuously, you could be forgiven. You could be forgiven for thinking that at some point along the way, the responsibilities that come with a social security system have somehow disappeared. Only a party intent on dividing a nation over welfare issues would perpetuate such a myth. No universally available safety net could survive without an understanding and agreement from the people it serves that it is there for genuine need. That when it is no longer needed, you must do all you can to move off it and begin to contribute back to the system that once supported you. It is that simple. This principle has not changed, and that Labor is a principle that Labor has always supported and has always defended. What is not simple, Mr. Speaker, are the reasons why a very small proportion of New Zealanders access our system and do so for a longer period of time. But we will never address this issue the longer some political actors, for their own gain, pretend that this is the case for the majority. And by vilifying everyone who uses Social Security along the way. Now, the Minister may deny that. She may stand there and claim that because she was on a benefit once, her changes are designed to empower and to support. But I have one question for the Minister, and that is how. How does labelling everyone as needing to be drug tested empower a job seeker? How does increasing the range of circumstances that sanctions can be used empower a sole parent? How does implying that beneficiaries are getting paid by the state while they have outstanding arrest warrants empower a sickness beneficiary? How does telling restricting the ability to study empower someone on an unemployment benefit? This bill tells me one thing, and that is that that minister underestimates the power of her rhetoric and the damage that can be done through it. Mr. Speaker, no one is going to argue that we have the perfect social security system as it stands. I agree with the minister on that much. Change is needed. But if we want to rebuild an active system, one that acts as a dignified transition for those who need it for a short time, and a dignified support system for those for reasons of terminal illness or significant disability will need it for a longer period in their lives, we no longer need to have the political games that occur around welfare. It is Labor's vision that we rebuild the foundations of what we built 75 years ago. We first must start by remembering the social contract, and that is that the state has a responsibility too. The minister may groan, and I can hear her from that side of the House dismissing this notion. But it is one thing to tell some of them that they will have extra work testing obligations. It is another to abandon the idea that the state no longer has any role in seeing if you're able to fulfil your side of the bargain. And on that score, the government is failing. In 2011, despite talk of 170,000 jobs miraculously being produced, there were just 20,000 produced under the government in that time. In the face of high unemployment and massive job losses, that is the time this government produced these punitive welfare reforms and ramped up expectations on job seekers who were already looking for work. Let's be clear. It is not like our system has gone from expecting absolutely nothing of job seekers to suddenly one day turning around and asking them to find work. In fact, our system goes a little more something like this. An individual, any one of us, might be made redundant and go to a work and income office to seek help. That work and income office will send them away and tell them that they need to demonstrate that they have looked for work before they can get help. Fair enough. Then they would also be required potentially to come back and do a course around work readiness. They will have several appointments through this process. It may take several weeks. Some of those appointments will be fulfilled by work and income. Some of them will not. Increasingly, appointments are becoming a guide, not a target, Mr. Speaker. Eventually, once you've fulfilled these peri-benefit activities, which can take up to several weeks, you may be granted access to support. You will then be required on an ongoing basis to demonstrate that you are continuing to seek work through applications or, in some cases, getting signatures from employees showing that you've asked them for employment. And amongst all of that, at any point you could be asked to do a short course on anything that work and income may deem appropriate for you. Now, Mr. Speaker, this might sound like you're getting some kind of individual one-on-one treatment. Let's be clear, you're not. You are at least one of up to 155 cases that a work and income case manager may have on their books. If you have no work testing obligations, you might be, the job seeker, Mr. Speaker, might be one of more than 350 cases that a work and income case manager has. You may know that you need to retrain to get a job, but under this bill, you can't. You may know that you need to invest a bit to try and get well from, say, a back injury or an impairment that is getting in the way of you getting employment. Under this bill, you won't get that. And let's be honest, you may have been on a benefit for some time and not have basic literacy. Under this bill, you might go on to a 12-week course, and then we magically assume work readiness. And everyone is battling it out for a handful of jobs. Mr. Speaker, this is the investment approach that this minister speaks of. This bill tears up the idea of a social contract. The message it sends is that job seekers' role is to look for work, and the government's role is to no longer ensure there are jobs, to train, to educate, to help you move into work. No, the government's role is simply to sanction you when you fail. That is what this bill does. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. Labor's vision is that in the 76th year of social security, and if that minister wants to listen, I will share with this House what a proactive system would look like. In the 76th year of this bill, we have the ability to turn around social security.
We're not going to have an incessant barrage. Order! I'm on my feet. We're not going to have an incessant barrage. Members may interject if it's rare and reasonable, but this is just ridiculous.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll begin with a simple notion that first, work and income managers have a big and a tough job, and there is absolutely no denying that, and they must be supported. But equally, they are the key to returning the dignity to our system, and so is the leadership that comes at the fore. Secondly, we must take a long-term view. Why do we treat a school leaver who, for instance, might not have NCEA level 2 or may have literacy problems so differently to someone who searched for a job but failed and is on an unemployment benefit? One might get free access to further training and education, perhaps through a youth guarantee, a notion that we support. The other may at best get 12 weeks of training through a course like the Salvation Army, and then we expect them to suddenly be work ready. It is time to invest to save, but that means genuinely invest, and that means decent training and education opportunities. Mr. Speaker, there are some who have been on welfare for longer periods of time and whose parents may have been too. No one in this House wants that to be the sum of any child's life. But it would be naive to say that simply imposing sanctions changes everything. It may not be glamorous or something the minister can stick a ribbon on and sell to the media, but these are the families that need long-term intervention, and not just by a work broker, if we want to make a real difference We need Mr Sabin to get a little more real. Mr Speaker, we can restore a social security system we can all be proud of. We just need to wait for the architects of that system to come back, and we will be.
Mr Sam Lodawinga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak on this, the third reading of the Social Security Amendment Bill. And Sir, before I start, I'd also like to